I'm Shaye Wolf. I'm the Climate Science Director at the Center for Biological Diversity.
And what is the Center for Biological Diversity?
The center is a nonprofit NGO. It's a conservation NGO based in the U.S. and our mission is to prevent species extinction. And in the climate program, we are trying to prevent species extinction from climate change. So we successfully got the polar bear protected under the Endangered Species Act. And we're trying to follow up on that work to get other species that are also on the brink, like corals and other ice-dependent species in the Arctic and mountaintop species protected as well. So, and another thing that we do is work under our domestic laws in the United States of the Clean Air Act to get the U.S. to bring down our emissions to safe levels. So.
Now, you've come a long way to come to Cancun. Why did you come here? What is it that drives you?
The driver is that we have this climate crisis that's not decades away. It's happening now, and it's impacting hundreds of thousands of people around the world, and it's impacting hundreds of thousands of species, animals and plants around the world. We're already seeing these really severe effects. And we have this closing window of opportunity to act. Year after year, the negotiations go on with very little progress in bringing down these pollutants that are jeopardizing the world. We have a closing window to act, and so one of our main messages here is let's get down to a safe level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that level is 350 parts per million or below. So we think about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's about level of about 390, and it's already too high. We're already at an unsafe level. We need to bring it down to 350 or below. That's what the scientists are telling us, and that's what we're here to advocate for.
And what's happening to biodiversity around the world?
Yeah, so biodiversity, climate change is already impacting biodiversity around the world, in every place that we look, in every corner of the globe. And so one of the effects places that's been highlighted that people know about is the Arctic, because the sea ice is melting so rapidly, and the sea ice a couple years ago in 2007 plummeted to a level that scientists didn't think would be reached until the year 2050. So sea ice is melting under the feet of the species of the wildlife that need it for survival, like the polar bear and the walrus and ice seals that need that ice to give birth, to rear their young and to find their mates and all of those essential kind of things for their survival. And so the polar bear, if we look at the polar bear in the Arctic, it's declining. Like 8 out of 19 polar bear populations are declining, and kind of more startling, is that they're starving, they're drowning because they have to swim over long distances of water now. They don't have the ice, and they're resorting to cannibalism. So these are very severe, significant effects that we're seeing right now. And if we look other places, so it's not just the Arctic, we're here in Cancun, and if we look at the corals right off of Mexico here and around the world, corals are on the verge of collapse. So ocean warming and ocean acidification are this double whammy for corals. The water is getting too hot and corals bleach. And this year in the Indo-Pacific, is this noise too loud?
The loudest bird in the world is right above
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
You want me to start again with corals?
You can keep.
Okay. So, one of the...
Yes. Left.
Okay, good.
Yeah, okay.
Good.
So, yeah, if you can start again.
Okay. So, one of the places where we're seeing the most kind of severe effects of climate change is in our coral reefs. And corals are so important. They support an estimated 1/3 of all of the species in the ocean. And they support about 500 million people, the livelihoods of about 500 million people. And around the world, corals are on the verge of collapse because of this double whammy of ocean warming and ocean acidification. So the water is getting too warm for corals and they're bleaching, and that exposes them makes them susceptible to death and disease. And this year in the ocean, especially in the Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, there was a massive coral bleaching and coral die-off. So about half of the coral colonies in many areas were bleached. So in addition to all the bleaching that's happening, there's also this impact of ocean acidification. And so many people know that carbon is polluting the atmosphere, but fewer people know that carbon is also polluting the ocean. So the ocean is sucking up a lot of the carbon that we're producing, about a third so far, a third of the carbon, and that makes the ocean more acidic. And the reason why that's important is because once the ocean becomes more acidic, it makes it more difficult for corals to build their shells. So they're not able, it's getting harder and harder for them to build those protective shells that they need for survival. And so the ocean's already 30% more acidic. The ocean's a big place, that's a huge change. Corals are already having trouble growing, and scientists are predicting that corals will, not that far in the future, that corals will start to dissolve if we continue polluting like we're polluting. Corals in the next few decades are on the verge of collapse. And so that's one of the many reasons the species in the Arctic that are losing their sea ice, the corals that are on the verge of collapse, is one of the many reasons why we need to get down to a safe level of 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, or kind of not exceed a temperature of about 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. That's why we need to get down.
Do you know any stats on like worldwide biodiversity loss and what's happening to species?
Well, if we continue polluting like we're polluting, then climate change will condemn about a third of the world's animals and plants to extinction by mid-century, so by the year 2050, and will threaten up to 2/3 with extinction by the end of the century. So that is a huge number, and that's unsustainable. We cannot go down that road. So what a level that would be protective and prevent many of those extinctions would be that safe level of about 350 parts per million or less.
Now, we often hear that, the sixth extinction, we're in the midst of the sixth extinction, we're causing the sixth extinction. What is that?
Yeah, so we've had kind of mass extinction crises in the past, but those have been caused largely by these big kind of geological events. This one is being caused by humans. People are causing this mass extinction of species around the globe, and so it's about 1,000 times. It's estimated that species are going extinct at about 1,000 times the rate as kind of a natural background level. So everywhere we look around the world, we're destroying habitat, right? Where species are suffering because we've introduced, other species in their area that are, killing the native species. And on top of all of those things, now we have climate change that's pushing this kind of house of cards further and further over the edge. Humans are causing this sixth mass extinction crisis, unlike extinctions. Let me start over. Sorry, now that I'm thinking about it too much. So we've entered a sixth mass extinction crisis, and unlike the extinction crisis in the past, this one is caused by humans, and that means that we are causing the extinction of species around the world at this unprecedented rate that hasn't been seen in millions and millions of years. So that means that we're causing not very good at that.
That's okay. What is this extinction going to be a problem for humans?
Oh yes. So, as we cause the extinction of species around us, that means that we're jeopardizing ourselves because we're all interconnected and interdependent. So although we take it for granted, we rely on the species around us for all our fundamental needs, for clean water, for our food, for the clean air that we breathe, for erosion control along the coast. When there's a big storm along the coast, those coastal wetlands protect us from those storms, and we get pollination of our crops from all the species around us. So as we push other species over the edge, we also jeopardize our own future.
And what does the future look like for species with business as usual?
In terms of climate change?
Not specifically climate change, all of these environmental issues we're facing.
Right. So already for many groups of species, it's about maybe a third to a half. In many groups like mammals or birds or reptiles, that about a third to a half are threatened with extinction. And so many species are already on the edge because they don't have places to live. We've destroyed their habitat. We've taken away many of their food sources. So as we now, with climate change and with this global crisis of climate change, we're pushing them further over the edge, and under business as usual, that means that about a third of species will be committed to extinction in just a few decades before mid-century if we don't act now.
Particular to rainforests, what's going on in rainforests around the world with species?
Yeah, that's not my strong suit because I work in the United States mostly. Basically it's, there's rapid deforestation of rainforests around the world. And then there's, I could talk a little bit about, I don't know how much you want to tie it into climate change at all, but basically there's massive deforestation, and then there's more and more of a push in many areas for the biofuels, which are promoted as sort of a green solution, but in many cases now the crops are being planted and are replacing native forest, to fuel a kind of biofuels push, and that's not sustainable. We need to protect our forests, our rainforests around the world, because they have so much life and they also hold a lot of carbon. So they are sort of part of the lungs of the of our globe that store carbon, keep that carbon stored so it isn't in the atmosphere. So
do you know anything particular about what's happening to frogs or reptiles?
Yeah, in terms of frogs, frogs are really on the edge. There have been many frogs are going extinct at a very rapid rate, and there's a few causes, and one of them that's come up recently is chytrid fungus. So it's a disease that's spreading around the world, and then in many cases is probably helped along by warming temperatures from climate change. So frogs are very sensitive to their surroundings because they have that thin skin. And so not only are they being harmed by kind of warming temperatures from climate change and more UV radiation, they're also being harmed by disease. And so they are one of the groups that is really on the edge.
Are amphibians in the same boat? All amphibians, or mostly frogs?
I think frogs in particular are really going extinct at a rapid rate. There has also been some new studies on lizards, so showing that lizards are also in trouble because many of them, as it gets too hot, can't get out there and get enough to eat. They need to stay in the shade rather than going to find food, and that means that they can't kind of have babies. They don't have enough energy to have babies. So there's been a lot of attention to lizards now winking out and going extinct around the world, and that perhaps about a fifth of lizards will go extinct by the end of the century if we continue to business as usual. So, across all groups, everywhere we look, everything's in trouble, including ourselves.
Is there one thing you think, the entire public or all of humanity should know about the biodiversity issue?
Beyond what I've said, I think a key point that I would emphasize is that we're all interconnected and interdependent, and we are causing the sixth mass extinction crisis. We're pushing species further and further over the edge. We're losing species at this unprecedented rate, and when we lose wildlife, we also jeopardize our future. And so I would say key to protecting ourselves and protecting the web of life around us, the millions of species that we depend on, is number one, we need to stop climate change, stop the climate crisis, and we know how to do that. We have the technology to do that. We have the knowledge. We just, at this point, don't have the political will. So it's incredibly important for everybody to be part of a movement from the bottom, up and to the top down. So, on an individual level, it's so important for us all to talk to our friends, our family, our peers at work about the climate crisis, that it's happening, that it affects us. It's not just a problem for our children and grandchildren, it's a problem for us right now and for those future generations. So get the word out. There's so many things that you can do in your personal life to reduce your carbon footprint in terms of, we need a kind of transportation revolution. So do your best to reduce your kind of carbon footprint from your travel, from your diet. You can eat kind of a lower meat diet that reduces your carbon footprint. You can make your home more energy efficient. There's a lot of ways to do that. And then importantly, because we also need leadership at the highest levels, is get your voice out there. Make your voice heard. Tell your elected representatives that you want change and action at all levels. At the state level, at the national level, at the international level, that you want action now. Because right now, corporate interests and polluters have a stranglehold on our politics and our politicians, and we need to break that stranglehold. That is jeopardizing ourselves and the rest of the planet if we continue business as usual. Get out there, make your voice heard, become part of the movement, join a group that appeals to you. Speak out. It is so important. Like, the time is not tomorrow, the time is now, the time was yesterday. We need to get started.
Anything else that you'd like to say that we haven't asked you or you think is important?
I mean, we could go for one like quick soundbite. If you wanted to just do something, a clincher.
Yeah. All right. I'm just trying to think of what I could say that I haven't said already. Is there anything that I've said that sort of stood out for you more than another? Like that's fits into your message of your film, or?
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that's important to us is that, we're losing biodiversity around the world at an alarming rate, that, people are talking about climate mostly, not talking about species, and that if we lose species, it's going to be a problem for humanity. That's sort of underlying our message in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
Anything else that fits into that would be great.
Okay.
Do you have anything else?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of how to say it in a way that I haven't said it yet. Because I'm completely on board with that. I mean, that's what our group does. That's our main message.
Yeah.
Is that, we're in the midst of this huge extinction crisis. We're pushing species over the edge, and further and further toward extinction. And it's gonna be a very, I guess the thing to me that stands out is it's going to be a very lonely and empty and impoverished planet. I mean, it's a planet that's not going to work. It's also going to be very lonely and empty, and without all of the millions of species around us that, we depend on for everything. I mean, spiritually, and for our kind of fundamental needs. So.
What's the world going to be like with rats and chickens and cockroaches?
Right. It's not. I mean, I think that we take the web of life for granted in many ways. I think that I don't think anybody, who wants a world that's filled with, the ocean that just has jellyfish, and when we walk around, all we're seeing is pigeons and cockroaches. That isn't a good world to be in. That's not a world that works. So.
Could you sum up, sort of the roles of biodiversity for us? Like, what does biodiversity do? Like, why is it important? What's the sort of, the web of life for dummies sort of thing?
Yeah. So, I think that a key is that to remember is that we're all interconnected and interdependent. So we're all part, like throughout our history, throughout human history, we are part of a web that we share with millions of animals and plants around the world, and that we rely on that wildlife to provide us with not only with to fulfill our emotional and spiritual needs, but also to fulfill like basic our fundamental needs, like providing us with food, providing us with clean water, providing us with pollination, with like protecting our coasts, protecting us from flooding and from storms. I mean, all of those things. We can't live without those things. And as we continue to kind of poke holes in the web of life and weaken the web of life, then we weaken kind of our ability to survive as a species.